When you go to give a speech, it's important to know your audience. Knowing who you are speaking to is really important because it allows you to have the possibility of making a stronger connection with them. If you're talking to children, you can talk about more childish things like maybe Minecraft or Legos or dinosaurs or Barbies. Or if you're talking to military veterans, you can talk about your personal story of serving, or when your father served in the military, or a friend. And this really helps build a stronger connection and gets the audience more engaged. You also want to talk about things that the audience wants to hear. No one wants to sit through a lecture or a speech about something that they have zero interest in. So you want to make sure that your audience is interested, because that already starts an engagement prior to your speech. And when you're giving your speech, you want to make sure that you are the expert on what you're talking about. Whether that be English or rocket science or math or, plumbing, you want to make sure that you know as much information on that topic as possible. If you're an English teacher, you don't want to be talking about rocket science and because you don't know much about it. And you don't want your audience to be correcting you when you're speaking, so you want to make sure you know as much information on the topic as possible. Ways to do this is to speak from your life experiences. No one else knows your life experiences, and you know your life better than anyone else. And that's one of the easiest ways to be, the expert. Other ways is to get sources other from the internet. You are from the internet, I'm not from the internet. Your friends and your family are not from the internet. And those are great sources because the internet's available to everyone and they can look anything you say up, but not those certain things. And when you're, developing your speech, you want to start with point A and end with point B. You want to make sure you start it a certain way and end it a certain way, but the road from point A to B can be however you want. And you want to make sure you have, commonalities throughout your speech and make them consistent, so that if you start going off on a tangent, you can come back and make sure that you end where you want to. And you want to keep it interesting. You want to keep people engaged, so you want to keep it light and fresh, and you want to come up with, anecdotes and analogies that are unique. And this really impacts the audience, because if you have some great analogy that they've never heard before, they're going to feel like, wow, that was amazing. And they're going to remember that because of how they felt when you gave it. And when you're preparing to give your speech, you want to record yourself and, be critical. And you want to look at the things that you did well, things that maybe you didn't know as much how to go from point A to point B, and work on those things. And other ways to speak in front of other people, your friends or family, and they can help critique because they have different points of view. When you're giving maybe like a 30-minute speech, it's good to prepare a little bit less, maybe like 25 minutes, because when you're speaking to yourself, there's no audience. But when you're speaking in public, there's an audience, and they react to certain things you say. So they might laugh or gasp, and you're going to pause a little bit longer to wait for those, laughing and gasping and maybe even applauding to end. So you want to prepare a little bit less time to make sure that you don't go over. It's good to prepare note cards as well and to color code them and to write down key points that you want to communicate and make sure that you hit those specific points for sure, and that they're incorporated into your speech somehow. And you want to make sure you write your speech in a way that people can listen to it and not just read it. You want to write your speech for speaking and not reading. Both are different things. Reading, people have any interpretation of how they read it and their voice in their head, but when they're listening to it, it's your voice, and you want to make sure that that can be communicated effectively to others. It's good to be nervous when you're giving your first speech or your 100th speech or 1 millionth speech. You can utilize those nerves. One way to utilize them is to smile. Smiling really gets you excited, turns those nerves into excitement, and gets you more animated in your speech. And the way is to have confident posture. Having confident posture makes you more confident. And then if you have more confidence, you'll have less nerves. The day before you give your speech, or 2 days before you give your speech, you want to make sure that you get good sleep and that you're not tired and that your brain can think properly and adapt to some situations while giving your speech. You also want to make sure that you eat and drink the proper things. You want to make sure you have plenty of water so that your mouth isn't super dry when you're giving your speech. You also want to make sure you eat things that, might not upset your stomach when you're nervous or in general. You also want to make sure that you dress appropriately and that it's similar to how the people there are dressed, maybe a little bit different, so it helps you stand out. When you start your speech, you want to make sure you start with an impact. You want to hook in your audience and get them engaged from the get-go. You want to try to build that connection. Throughout your speech, like I said earlier, you want to know where you're going from point A to point B. And so you kind of want to know the flow of how you want to get from point A to point B. A way to engage the readers or the audience is to say you. That really individualizes and personalizes your speech, and the audience feels like you're talking directly towards them. Another way is to give them a task, maybe to turn their neighbor and talk to them. And that just gets them more engaged in your speech. Another way is the rule of threes, where you list things in threes and people remember those really, really well. And also that facts tell and stories sell. So that you can just bombard people with facts and information, and that's good and all, and that tells people things, but stories really build the connection and get people more emotionally invested into what you're saying. In your speech, it's good to have as little sarcasm as possible, because that means you're joking. When you use sarcasm, you don't want your audience to think you're joking about whatever topic, and just think that what you're saying is just for fun when you're trying to be serious. And when you're talking, you want it to be like a normal conversation, and you don't want to be giving this certain announcer voice, because that really just depersonalizes the speech. And when you're talking with your friends, you don't want them to do that, right? When they're telling you a story, you don't want them to talk like that, so you shouldn't talk like that during your speech. And it's good to pause during your speeches every once in a while as effect, and with that, your pace. You can talk faster or slower. You can really put emphasis on certain parts of your speech. And when you're ending your speech, you don't want to say, "Oh, I'm going to end my speech," because that gets people to start paying less attention. And they're like, "Oh, the speech is about to end, let me get ready to go." You don't want them to disengage from what you're saying. And you want to end with, maybe a memorable phrase or something that they can take away and say, the speech was about this, when their friend asks them what it was about. And at the very end, it's good to thank people. Thank the cameraman, thanks the sound person, the tech IT guy. It's good to thank people, because when the audience is clapping, they're thanking you, and it's going to give thanks back.